Hey, it's Isa with Journey to Programming. Let's talk about freelancing versus starting a small business. But before we do, please do hit that subscribe button down below. And I would appreciate it if you guys also hit that bell so you know when new content's being posted. Let's go ahead and jump right in. So when you decide to be a freelancer, you are now going into business for yourself. It's exactly the same as starting a small business. You are now taking care of your own taxes. You are also deciding on whether or not you want to be a sole proprietor, a partnership, an LLC, an S Corp, or any of those options that are business entity type classifications. Now, the downsides to calling yourself a freelancer can come in the form of respect by the companies you're working for or freelancing for, because the downsides of it are a lot of companies will look at you and say, oh, this is a freelancer. They work for themselves and they probably are working at their house or out of their home studio or out of their home office because they're calling themselves a freelancer. I don't understand why that happens, but that does happen in industry, and a lot of companies tend to do that. Not all companies, but a lot of them do. So there's the downside to being a freelancer and kind of relaying yourself as that. Now, if you decide to be a freelancer, if you bring the confidence with you and you set the expectations initially when you're working with a company, then you can set the pace and the way that they respect you early on. That's not going to stop the large companies that treat you guys or treat freelancers like work for hires and badly, etc., any differently, but at least it will set the pace with who you're interacting with immediately, and then you can decide if you want to work with those people. Now, when you decide to be a small business, you can be a small business as a freelancer. You can portray yourself in either way, but as a small business, you tend to get a little bit more respect from companies. Usually they look at you more as a vendor and as though you have an office space that's actually a brick and mortar location. And for some reason, they think that's important to them or important for their image. But you tend to get a little bit more respect because of that. Now, again, the differences between small business and freelancer are really nothing. You run your own company, you run your own business, you pay your taxes depending on your entity type. So how you portray yourself is up to you. All right. Now, the other big difference between these is how you can price yourself. I have found that freelancers tend to be able to price themselves in the, let's say, $50 to $125 range an hour, or based on projects. If you're value pricing, you could value price, but you still can't really meet that pricing that small businesses are able to hit in terms of the prices that are acceptable to the companies that you're going to work for. When a company hires a small business, which they view as a vendor, usually they're expecting a slightly higher rate or a slightly higher price per project rather than hiring a freelancer. Companies will hire freelancers because they think it's going to be cheaper and because they think they're going to be able to control you a little bit more. Again, that's all kind of the unfortunate side of calling yourself a freelancer or a small business, but that's how the industry works. Now, in both cases, no matter if you choose to be a small business or a freelancer, the most important thing you're going to have to do is drive business into your company. If you cannot drive business into your company, then you're going to have a very, very tough time surviving as a business owner and having a successful business for a long while. You have to get out there, go to meetups, go to events through Eventbrite, find your local chamber of commerce, check out those events, see if there's anything useful or any contacts that are useful there. Create an online presence, have a website, put up blog articles and YouTube videos like I'm doing here. You have to do all these things as a business owner because your most important job as a business owner is to drive business into your company. And once you've driven business into your company, you should not stop there and take over all of the implementation 100% of the time of your day or your week. You need to keep on driving more business because you're going to really quickly find out that after one job is done or one contract is finished, you need to have another job lined up immediately after to make sure you have continuous income coming in. And what we're going to do is talk about the business entity types next. And here we go. So as you begin your business and you really start jumping into it, you need to decide how you want your business to be formed. Do you want it to be a sole proprietorship or a partnership? Do you want to form an LLC or an S corp? Those are crucial decisions to make, but I'll tell you right now, do not spend a ton of time thinking about this and being nervous about the decision you're going to make, because again, the most important thing you need to do is first get business coming into your company. Now, I am not a lawyer, so you don't have to take my opinion here as gospel, but I have been kind of at the forefront of starting a business multiple times, and I do have my own LLC right now. I also have in the past run companies as a sole proprietor. I've also been a part of partnerships before, and I'll tell you right now, I probably jumped into getting an LLC formation too early the very first time I started the business. And the reason I did it is because I was, let's say, ignorant to the information, because I just had never begun a business. I didn't have enough education in business to know that I didn't have to start an LLC immediately. So I just kind of listened to everybody say, oh, you need to start an LLC to protect your assets and to protect all of your house and all of these types of things. And I got a little bit worried and nervous, and I jumped in and did it. I spent the money in California to incorporate. If you don't know, I think it's a minimum $800 fee every year to keep an LLC or a corporation active in California. And that was extremely costly. I mean, the original cost to form that LLC wasn't that bad because I did it all myself, but it still cost a lot of money for a tiny business like mine to stay alive and expect to be able to pay those fees yearly. But again, to each their own. I recommend, if you're just now starting your company as a freelancer or a small business, start out as a sole proprietor or a partnership, and then move into becoming an LLC. If you're gung-ho about becoming an LLC or forming an S corp right away, look for the states that have a lot of benefits towards kind of company formations. So you're looking at like Delaware Corps, Wyoming has some good benefits, Nevada has some great benefits and no state income tax. Let's see, who else? Texas actually has some pretty good incorporation type benefits. And there's a lot of states out there that help protect you and also have very low cost incorporation fees. A lot of people will tell you, if you're starting a business in a state like California, because that's where you're going to be doing business, that you have to form the LLC or the incorporation there. That's not always true. If you're forming a web-based business and you're never going to have a brick and mortar shop, which is going to have people walking in and out daily, then you don't necessarily need to form your LLC there. If you do expect to be doing business in person with people in a state like California, then you probably should talk to an attorney and see if forming a business there is right for you. Now, let's talk about the big differences between being a sole proprietor, having a partnership, forming an LLC, and having an S corp. All right, sole proprietorships and partnerships. I'm going to group them together because they are relatively the same. The main difference between having a sole proprietorship or a partnership is, in a sole proprietorship, you are the only owner of the business, okay? A partnership is a combination of people that form a partnership legally. So you want to find some sort of contract documentation that you both agree to, and it will basically define how much ownership each partner has. And in both cases, what ends up happening is the tax is passed through to the individuals. All right. The sole proprietorship and partnership entity type both have one downside to them, and that's that as the owner of a sole proprietorship or a partnership, or the owners of a partnership, all of the repercussions, all of the legal kind of aspects to it are personal. So if your company were to be sued, or if your company were to face financial issues and you owed money to someone or a bank, etc., they have the right to immediately go to your personal assets and take it from you. Now, as a small business, that's not a huge issue. You're not usually going to be taking on contracts that are multi-million-dollar contracts or even in the six-figure ranges. And when you do break into the five-figure ranges, at that point, you're probably figuring out how established you are, and you're figuring out that, hey, okay, maybe I should move on from being a sole proprietorship or a partnership and form a entity type that will protect our company assets and our personal assets. But when you're starting out and you just want to get your business up and running, being a sole proprietor and having a partnership, if that's the type of business you're running, is actually not that bad. It can be beneficial because it eliminates all of the burden of having to separate your taxes from your personal taxes, okay? And that can be complex in the beginning. Also, it's much cheaper to form. So as a sole proprietor, you can just jump into business. And as a partnership, it's the same thing. You guys just decide you want to start a business and you do it. You don't have to worry about going to the Secretary of State for the state and then finding all your business licenses and getting everything figured out before you start actually doing business. Instead, you can just begin it right away. Now, some places, some states, some cities still require you to get business certifications and licenses. It just depends on your current location. So I can tell you in East County, San Diego, El Cajon, you did have to get a business license for the city, but you didn't have to get one for the state if you just ran a sole proprietorship. And that was one of the benefits. So it's a lot cheaper to run a sole proprietorship because in California, to form an LLC or an S Corp, you at least have to pay $800 a year. So that's going to be the downside there. All right. And that's based on your taxes. So if you actually have more taxes, you're going to pay more, but the minimum tax you're always going to pay is $800 a year. All right. Let's see. So going on from there, I talked about the benefits and downsides to having a sole proprietorship and partnership. The benefits, it's cheap and you could start right away. The only restrictions you really have are based on where you live. And that's going to be if they require you to have a certification or a business license, then you have to go do that. And that cost usually isn't that bad. Now, if you do get sued or if you have any financial issues, you do not have a separation between your personal finances and the business finances when you are in a partnership or a sole proprietorship. So those are the downsides there. And if you do want to add those protections, you want to start considering an LLC. So let's move on to LLCs. LLCs. So LLCs are great because they help create a separation between your business assets and your personal assets. So if a issue comes up where you're sued or the government wants to take money from your business, they can't go immediately and take money from your personal assets. They can't go take your home right away or take your vehicles or your money from your personal bank accounts. They would have to go through a legal process to do so, and they'd have to do basically a piercing the veil type situation. If you guys don't know what that is, go ahead and check it out. It basically means that the government can, if you have an LLC and a corporation, they can cross over from the business assets and take it from your personal assets. At least, though, having an LLC gives you a little bit of an extra layer of protection. And one of the best ways to ensure that you retain that layer of protection is to properly set up your company and all your documentation, your bank accounts, and your finances in a way that ensures that you're kind of separated from each other. And the best way to do that is to talk to an accountant and a tax professional who knows how to set those things up if you don't know how to already. If you've done this before, if you've been down the line or the experience of starting a business, and you may know this stuff already and you can do it for yourself. But if it's your first time, you probably should talk to somebody who knows the professional ins and outs of setting up an LLC or an S Corp. So again, we talked about this a little bit earlier with what are the downsides of having an LLC. The downsides are that it's costly and it does add a little bit of complexity, even though an LLC is a pass-through entity, meaning that your taxes do pass through to the owners directly, and you're actually able to file that on your personal taxes. It still does create a little bit of a complexity that's a little bit more complex, or a little bit of a complexity in comparison to the sole proprietorship or partnership. And that's because you're going to have to now take your business taxes and all that business information and add them in. It's not extremely complex, but it does take a little bit more effort. Additionally, I did mention the costs. You will have to pay your annual costs, your annual taxes for that business. And that is going to be a little bit of an added complexity. Of course, if you have a good, not attorney, a good accountant, this will be quite easy for you. Or if you're using a good platform like TurboTax, or if you're keeping annual kind of documentation on a platform like, let's see, I use Gusto for payroll. Then my payroll is handled and they actually form all my documentation in there. So there's a handful of benefits or ways to make your life easier in terms of keeping your tax documentation, legal documentation straight. But it does require that extra effort. If you do not pay for those services, you have to do it yourself. And that adds a little bit of complexity, but it's great to learn if you're planning on going into business yourself anyways. It could just add a little bit of a burden onto your shoulders if you really want to focus on your business, which is what you should be doing as a startup or a small business, or even as a freelancer. So it's something to consider. S Corps. So they're very similar to LLCs in many ways. For one, it's a pass-through taxation type of business kind of format or taxation format. And two, you also keep the limited liability because the government and the IRS look at your company as separate entities from your personal assets. So that's a benefit. Another similarity is the actual documentation and requirements by the state you're in or the Secretary of State for keeping that company alive. So S Corps can have advantages taxation-wise for the owners who will, if you are forming an S Corp, basically be employees of the company as well as technically shareholders. So there are the benefits to that, and that has to do with basically your self-employment taxes. You're not going to have to pay 100% self-employment tax because not all the money you're going to be paid out is self-employment. It actually is going to be partially employment taxes as a W-2 employee for your own company. But deciding whether or not the right thing to do is to become an S Corp is something that you really need to do wisely, and you really should talk to a tax professional to find out. In some cases, it can be very beneficial depending on how your profits and losses look. But in other cases, depending on your trade and your overall annual profits, it may not be beneficial. So definitely double check that before you do. Now, we've talked about basically, let's see, sole proprietorships, partnerships, LLCs, and S Corps. I am not going to talk about C Corps because C Corps are another beast all in themselves. The way taxation works is a lot more complex, and that's because there's taxation at the corporation level and then taxation at the payment level to say the owners of the company who will pay themselves out in the form of basically a disbursement. And there's a lot of complexity behind that. And there's a whole talk about double taxation, etc. So we're not going to talk about that. But with all of this information, again, I'm going to go back to what I said earlier. If you're just starting a company and you want to get into business, I think that the best way to go is start the business, get some business rolling, get some clientele that's coming to your company, and go from there. As a sole proprietor or a partnership, you can still run your business just like any other vendor. You may face some questions from potential clients on how you guys are formed. Are you guys an LLC or a C Corp or an S Corp? And if you guys are bidding on larger contracts, they may want to see that documentation, but I've never found it to be a problem. I've never found a company that won't work with you if you're just a sole proprietorship or a partnership. As long as you can get insurance for your company, usually they're open to any of them. Now, at a certain point, you may want to form an LLC. I think it's advantageous to do so because of that separation, the limited liability separation of your assets. That is advantageous. I think an LLC it was the right choice for me and my company when I formed it, or the last company I formed it as an LLC. And I think that was advantageous to me, but I don't think that necessarily an LLC will always be the best option for you. You may want to go with an S Corp. And that may be the best option, but it's going to be based on your finances, the profits and losses that your company is facing or is you're speculating it's going to face. And the only person that can help you with that is really a tax professional. Now, if you have questions about the differences between these entity types or ways that taxation works, again, S Corp designation is really a tax designation. So is LLC. An LLC is a formation that you have to do it with a Secretary of State, usually for your state that you live in, and you do have to pay the amounts to file your articles of organization. You have to submit annual documentation or biannual documentation to the state to make sure that they know what's going on with your business. The same thing goes with an S Corp. An S Corp can be more complex than just an LLC. But underneath the hood, an LLC is generally still, if you're just a single person that owns your LLC like I am the only owner of my company. The government doesn't really care that I'm an LLC. On my IRS documentation, on my taxes, all they see is that I'm a sole proprietor. Technically, I'm an individual that owns a company, and my taxes are passed through to myself. So to them, I'm just a sole proprietor. Although legally I am an LLC and that documentation's all there. Oh, I think my mic has been migrating downwards. In any case, I wanted the benefits for my company. I wanted to protect my personal and business assets and create that separation. I don't think it's always necessary. Make that choice depending on your situation. If you guys have questions, please do leave them in the comments down below. I'm going to make another video here where I show you guys how you actually apply for this documentation and how you figure out whether or not your local city requires you to have business licenses and certificates, etc. If you're interested in learning more about that, I definitely recommend you check out the Secretary of State for your current state. And then you can also look at the local city website to find out what the business license information is and the business tax information is for your local city. Usually that's all posted and it's public for you guys to access. And again, have a good one, you guys. If you haven't subscribed, please do. Have a good one.